Have you ever considered why some women embrace solitude without a boyfriend, a partner, or even the appearance of seeking one? The truth isn't loneliness, a lack of options, or heartbreak. It resides in something far more profound, more unsettling, something that dismantles every notion we've been taught about a woman's purpose. When a woman chooses to be alone, she isn't lost. She is discovering herself, and this journey of self-discovery isn't met with applause, validation, or company. It arrives with silence, with strength, and with a kind of freedom most people still struggle to comprehend. No, she isn't lonely, she is discerning. She isn't cold, she simply grew weary of burning for those who never truly wished to feel her warmth. There is a deep, inherent challenge in a woman who doesn't require a relationship to feel complete. This shatters the illusion of control, dismantles the myth of emotional dependence, and exposes a raw truth most men don't know how to handle. A woman who doesn't need saving, and most women are still learning to recognize themselves in that silent yet resounding mirror of power. Carl Jung once posited that everything we deny within ourselves becomes part of our shadow. Many of these single women are in fact a reflection of the collective shadow. They embody what many aspire to be, but few possess the courage to manifest. They don't clamor for love, they whisper their choices. They don't put themselves on display to attract attention, they retreat to preserve their essence. In the meantime, we dance to a new bad bottom and a more appropriate essence. They are less captivated by charming princes and more by their own inner peace. This makes people uneasy because while the world demands urgency to couple up, these women have unearthed the profound power of being with themselves. The woman who lives alone, without a partner, isn't adrift. She's operating on an elevated plane, a plane where nothing is begged for, but everything is chosen, where approval is unnecessary and presence is enough. Perhaps this is why she elicits such criticism, such judgment, so many attempts to categorize or explain her. But what many fail to grasp is that behind her apparent absence lies a presence that feels, that transcends, that challenges the emotional status quo. She doesn't desire just any kind of love. She seeks a love that doesn't diminish her, and until that arrives, she stands strong, whole, complete. Perhaps you don't understand it now. Perhaps you dismiss it as exaggeration, arrogance, or disguised emotional wounds. But deep down, a quiet question pulses within you, even when you try to ignore it. What if that silent path is, in fact, the only one that leads to the most vital kind of love? The love that begins with you. The silence that envelops a woman who lives alone is not emptiness. It is a sanctuary. Those who fail to grasp the value of this space often label her cold, distant, or even arrogant. Yet few perceive that she didn't construct that fortress to shut the world out. She built it to avoid losing herself. Carl Jung also stated that everything we don't confront within ourselves, we end up projecting onto others. Perhaps this is why so many women still conflate solitude with absence, when in reality it can be the fertile ground for self-discovery. While most people seek fulfillment through external connections, this woman turned her gaze inward, and there, in the vastness of her own unconscious, she confronted the specters she had avoided for years. Childhood wounds, unspoken abandonments, attachments masquerading as love. Her decision to be alone didn't stem from an open wound, but from a scar that had finally healed. She didn't cease believing in love. She simply stopped accepting what others called love when it only made her feel smaller. This woman is intimately familiar with chaos. She has loved until she lost herself. She has given too much. She has pleaded for crumbs that should never have been offered. But at some point she awakened, and that awakening wasn't sudden. It was a series of disappointments that ceased to wound and began to teach. What you perceive now isn't coldness, it's emotional maturity. And maturity is daunting because it demands presence, depth, and truth. She doesn't desire just any company. She seeks reciprocity. She is no longer swayed by promises, but by genuine presence. Perhaps that's why she seems unattainable to many, because she doesn't wish to be saved. She wishes to be seen. and that requires more than charm or sweet words. It demands the courage to delve into depths where few dare to venture, and that's where many falter, not because she is difficult, but because she is whole. When a woman becomes whole, she ignites two extremes in the world: admiration and fear. Admiration from those who are also pursuing that wholeness, and fear from those who still exist in halves, awaiting someone else to make them feel complete. She doesn't aspire to complete anyone. She desires to overflow alongside someone who has also found themselves. Until then, she remains alone, not by fate's decree, but out of loyalty to her own soul. This woman isn't concealing herself, she is protecting herself. There is a vast distinction between isolating and preserving oneself. But the world doesn't readily accept a woman like this. A world that still preaches happily ever after only exists in pairs. A world that distrusts those without a partner, as if that were a mark of failure. Carl Jung once remarked that where convention dictates, there's little room for authenticity. And this woman does not live by convention, she lives by essence. She hears phrases like, "You're too picky," "You should be more open," "Nobody's perfect," and she smiles, a calm, steady, almost ironic smile, because she understands that what many deem picky is simply her bare minimum, the minimum it took her decades to realize she deserves. She isn't seeking perfection, she is seeking someone mature enough to love without destroying, someone who has undertaken the inner work she has already faced. And let's be honest, that's not something you stumble upon on every street corner. The discomfort she causes isn't in what she articulates, it's in what she embodies. She is living proof that happiness is attainable without depending on anyone else, and that strips away the masks of men who feed on female insecurity, making them feel threatened. Women still ensnared in the need for approval feel judged. But she is not here to confront anyone. She is simply being. And the authenticity of someone who has liberated herself is, in itself, a brutal mirror to those still living in chains. This woman is not in a hurry. She doesn't need to rush things to appease anyone. She respects her own rhythm, and for that, she ignites a silent fury in a society that craves instant gratification. She desires depth while the world chases distractions. She seeks presence while the world offers only superficial availability. She yearns for soul-level connections while everyone else strives to appear interesting on their next Instagram story. And when she says no, it's not a game, it's the truth. When she walks away, it's not drama, it's self-defense. When she chooses to remain home instead of going out with someone empty, it's not arrogance, it's clarity. And that clarity, forged through pain and surrender, is her greatest revolution. Because she doesn't live to please, she lives to be. And that simple act, being, is what makes her so dangerous to the system. Perhaps what most unsettles people about this woman isn't her solitude, it's the peace she has discovered within herself. Carl Jung taught that those who look outward dream, but those who look inward awaken. And it was precisely that inner journey she undertook. It wasn't easy. It was an arduous process of shedding masks, confronting the ghosts of emotional dependency, and rebuilding herself piece by piece. She no longer defines herself through the eyes of others. She sees herself through her own eyes, and that changes everything. How many times have you pondered whether being alone signifies failure or freedom? How many times have you felt the need to justify your lack of a partner? This woman has experienced that too. She once believed there was something inherently wrong with her for being alone in a world that idolizes couples, even unhappy ones. But one day she understood. It's better to be alone than to be invisible in a relationship. And that day she made a pact with herself. Never again would she accept less than what she truly deserves. Her path is not a straight line. There are days of doubt, moments of nostalgia, nights of profound silence. But there is also a strength that grows with each decision made in awareness. She learned that true love doesn't cage, doesn't consume, doesn't manipulate. The love she desires is the kind that liberates, that adds, that supports without suffocating. And until that love arrives, she chooses to continue growing on her own, not out of pride, but out of integrity. This woman is the living embodiment of Jung's individuation. She shattered, faced her shadow, descended into the unconscious, and returned more whole than ever. And now that she recognizes herself, she refuses to be half of anything again. She doesn't desire someone to complete her. She desires someone to share that awareness with. That is intimidating because it demands emotional responsibility. And sadly, few are willing to love responsibly. Most still love out of lack, out of possession, out of fear. And if she walks alone today, it is because every step echoes with learning. Every no she utters is an act of self-respect. Every absence she imposes is a reminder that love should never be begged for. She no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. And that certainty, born from the deepest part of her soul, transforms everything around her. Because a woman who has rediscovered herself becomes dangerous, not because of her weapons, but because of her clarity. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend is not the same woman who once pleaded to be loved. Something within her broke, and it was precisely that break that set her free. Because sometimes only in collapse does the soul find its new form. Carl Jung used to say that the tree that grows to heaven must also have roots that reach down to hell. And that's exactly what she experienced. She descended into the hell of her own story, faced ancestral fears, inherited pain, traumas that weren't solely hers, but those of all the women who came before her. She broke cycles. She said no to relationships that repeated the same toxic script. She learned that it wasn't her duty to heal anyone, save anyone, or accept crumbs out of fear of being alone. And when she stopped accepting less, the world tried to convince her she was wrong. But she stood her ground, first with uncertainty, then with awareness, and finally with invulnerability. Because someone who has lived in their own abyss no longer fears absence. She learned to nourish herself with silence, to warm herself with her own presence. She's not unreachable. She simply no longer allows herself to be invaded. There's a world of difference between opening your heart and letting yourself be torn apart. She opens, yes, but only for those who come in truth, not with rehearsed speeches or empty promises. She's seen enough to differentiate between presence and performance. Her intuition has become sharp. Her energy is a filter. She can sense from afar what lacks depth, and she doesn't hesitate to walk away. Her transformation isn't superficial, it's archetypal. It's as if she's tapped into an ancient wisdom, an old memory that women weren't born to serve but to express, not to be shaped but to overflow. And in accessing that memory, something awakened in her, a wild woman, intuitive, emotionally sovereign, a woman who, though alone, is far from lost. She's in communion with something greater, with her own destiny. And no matter how much they try to diminish her with labels, cold, difficult, distant, nothing sticks. Because she no longer lives to fit in, she lives to expand. She no longer fights for attention, she radiates presence. She's no longer waiting to be chosen, she does the choosing. And that reversal of logic confuses those who still attempt to control the feminine. But she's no longer there. She's already crossed the threshold. And on the other side, she discovered that the real relationship begins only after you've loved yourself enough not to need anyone. There's something sacred about the way she navigates the world. She doesn't require applause or public validation. Her confidence is quiet, and it's in that silence that her true strength resides. Carl Jung said that everything we face within eventually becomes our destiny. And perhaps that's why this woman, in choosing herself again and again, has become the author of a destiny that few can comprehend but many secretly envy. She no longer attempts to fill voids with promises or convince anyone that she deserves love. She doesn't beg for space in anyone's life because she's learned that presence should never be begged for. It should be invited. And when the invitation doesn't come from truth, she simply declines. She doesn't react with anger or bitterness. She steps away with the dignity of someone who's gotten lost too many times to let the same wound recur. What few people understand is that this woman still yearns for love. She still desires to be held, touched, chosen, but she wants it without losing herself, because she spent too long trying to squeeze into molds too small for the soul she carries. Now she only offers herself where there's room to be whole. And that requires a level of maturity that transcends mere romance. It requires awareness. It requires having faced one's own shadow and still choosing to love. She's not seeking fairy tales. She's seeking a soul alliance, a connection where there's no domination or submission, where both can grow alongside each other without dimming their colors, silencing their pain, or shrinking their dreams. And if that seems too much for some, so be it, because she'd rather wait than subsist on emotional crumbs. And to many, that sounds like arrogance, but it's truly just self-love in its purest form. We are witnessing a new archetype of woman, a woman who has walked away from the superficial and dived into the depths, who grew tired of being merely desired and chose to be respected, who chose to be alone not because she gave up on love, but because she began to understand that real love never demands self-denial. And when a woman understands that, her entire world begins to transform. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence speaks before any words. Wherever she goes, the energy shifts, like something in the room subtly but unmistakably realigns. This isn't mysticism, it's energy. It's the weight of someone who has already faced the most brutal inner wars and chose to return in peace. Not because she conquered all her fears, but because she learned to live with them without being defeated. Carl Jung would say she found wholeness not by eliminating opposites, but by integrating them. This woman doesn't reject love. She simply learned not to submit to unbalanced relationships where one must dim so the other can shine. She longs to love, but in a love where her essence doesn't need to be edited. A love where she can be both shadow and light, laughter and tears, silence and storm, because she realized that those who only love the pretty parts haven't yet learned what love truly is, and those who demand constant sweetness still don't understand the beauty of bitterness, so necessary for growth. She is too whole to settle for halves, too free to accept prisons disguised as care, too sensitive to endure shallow bonds, and at the same time strong enough to keep choosing this path, even when it hurts, even when it's lonely, even when it's misunderstood. That is the journey of an awakened soul, relinquishing instant validation in exchange for deeper truth. Deep down, the world fears women like her, women who don't need, women who don't bow, women who refuse to be molded, because they challenge invisible structures, question old patterns, and break silent emotional contracts that once dictated a woman's worth only existed if she was with someone. And when she breaks those contracts, when she rewrites her own narrative, she inspires others. And that for the system is dangerously revolutionary. So she continues, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with her chest held high, but always with her feet firmly on the ground. Because now she knows she's not alone. She's with herself. And after everything she's lived through, that is more than enough. The love that comes after that won't be salvation. It will be celebration. It won't come to fill her. It will come to overflow. When a woman chooses to walk alone, the world rushes to convince her she's making a mistake. But deep down, she feels something aligning within her. It's not pride or rebellion. It's a rare kind of wisdom that can only be born in silence. The same wisdom Jung called individuation, the process of becoming fully who you are, without masks, without compromise. And when that happens, nothing outside her holds more power than the truth that pulses inside her chest. That truth doesn't need to shout. It can manifest in the way she quietly closes the door without resentment, in how she withdraws when the environment no longer nourishes her, in the way she smiles in peace, even with no one by her side, because she discovered that being alone is not a punishment. It's a vow of loyalty to her own soul. And the soul of an awakened woman does not submit, does not dim, does not beg. It simply is, and that is enough. The world will keep trying to tell her she's missing something. It will keep offering distractions, plastic princes, love made for display, but she's already seen behind the curtain. She's already understood. It's not about finding someone. It's about never losing yourself again. And when that realization blooms, everything changes. Desire becomes discernment. Lack becomes choice. Waiting becomes a path. And what once hurt now teaches. What once bound now sets free. You can feel it deep inside, that stirring, that spark. Perhaps it's a memory, an old wound, a nostalgia that never made sense. Perhaps it's the image of a woman you once knew, or the woman you've become. In either case, something within you is asking to be seen more clearly. Something that no longer fits in old molds. Something that, if you allow it, could completely transform how you relate to love, to others, and most importantly, to yourself. That woman who lives alone is more than just someone who doesn't fit the mold. She is a living symbol of emotional freedom, a reminder that it's possible to rebuild without hurry, without fear, and without needing to prove anything to anyone. She doesn't walk ahead of anyone, but she doesn't follow either. She carves her own path, unique, inviolable, and along that journey she lights little fires for others who are waking up too. If something inside you was touched by this story, perhaps it's because deep down you too are ready for a new kind of love. A love that begins with reconciliation with yourself. A love that feeds on silence, presence, and truth. A love that can't be negotiated, begged for, or disguised. And if that love hasn't come yet, perhaps it's because you first needed to become the woman who no longer accepts less than she deserves. And if this message found you at the right moment or awakened someone you forgot was living inside you, then I invite you not to keep it to yourself. Share this message with other women who need to remember their own strength. Engage with it. Not out of impulse, but out of choice. Because when something touches the soul, the least we can do is let it keep resonating within us and through us.